and welcome to our second interview today with Professor Wolfgang Streeck, who is an economic sociologist. Reopen interview series presents Europeans with a variety of critical voices. And to this end, we interview a broad spectrum of thinkers that are ranging from scholars to journalists. Reopen is committed to the ideal of free and democratic Europe, and finding a functional model for a European project requires discussion. And our mission today is to stimulate and organize such a debate. So welcome, Professor Streeck. It is a great pleasure to have you today. Our interview today is going to ask a number of questions that I believe that are important for us to be able to analyze the current developments in Europe. And one of the biggest questions today is that we are witnessing a new dimension of internal differentiation amongst different member states of the EU, particularly the Central and Eastern European countries. They're slowly but certainly transforming themselves from predominantly passive policy takers towards becoming more active players in the process of shaping of the European project. The post-political conception of the EU, which became dominant in the 90s, is nowadays increasingly being challenged by a number of different actors. So therefore, we start seeing limits of the European project. These developments have taken different shapes, and different explanations in the academic literature have been offered to account for this political unrest. Alternatives in opposition to the existing condition of the European project tend to be described with populist label. However, once we focus on this one single specific juncture, it does not allow us to capture the longer trajectories, and this is what I would like to discuss with you today, Professor Streeck. Now, in order to describe the European Union, you came up with the concept of a liberal empire, right? And one of the cornerstones of such an empire is this hierarchical structure, which is built around this dichotomy between the center and periphery. Now, of course, in this picture, the Central and Eastern European countries represent the periphery of the European Union. Now, if you look at the history of the accession process of the former Soviet bloc countries, right, do you think that the mainstream academic literature have missed certain important turning points and trajectories that are today crucial to our ability to analyze the current situation in Europe?
Yeah, Petr, first of all, I'm very pleased to be on this program and to answer the very important questions that you're raising. Is the equipment functioning correctly?
Yes, it is.
Okay, good. Then I would say, if you talk about the structure of an empire, then you look at the number of states with a gradient of power distinguishing them from a center. An empire needs a center, hegemonic force to the periphery. Now, some empires are being kept together by violence. Others are basically simply economic empires, as in the history of capitalism. For the European Union, I think what has emerged in recent years is the change towards what I call a liberal empire, built on liberal markets, but then also on the export of a mainstream culture from the center to the periphery. Now, that is a risky enterprise, and sometimes it is hard to understand how politicians or political leaders in the center can hope to unite Europe on the basis of a standardized liberal culture, which even in the West is relatively new. In my own life, I remember that maybe 30, 40 years ago, most of what the LGBTQ or whatever movement today wants was totally anathema in the public mind. It just didn't exist, and nobody cared for it. So imposing such kind of radical change through export of values, as you can say, is something that at the first glance looks a little bit mysterious. Now, I think we'll talk about more on this, but what I'd like to emphasize is that that one of the structural conditions under which empires hold together is the capacity of the center to bring to power on the periphery elites that are basically sort of culturally united, culturally in agreement with the mainstream culture of the system. And in many respects, I think there's here an attempt to to accomplish something like a regime change, which makes these countries more willing to listen to and follow what the center has to say. And in terms of the politics of power, I think the relationship between culture and international hegemonic power is a very important one, and I see that at work here.
So, and if you look back at the 20 years since the enlargement, would you say that this is one of the important moments that have not been included in our understanding of Europe and its current crisis?
Yes, I think it is, and you can locate it historically at the point where the promise of the accession, which was a rapid catching up through the internal market of Eastern member states with the prosperity of Western member states. In other words, the end of the great differences in prosperity, where that promise did not fulfill itself. And where after, especially 2008, it became clear that the European Union was not a regime of unlimited economic growth and unlimited convergence between its member states. Now that caused tensions. Take a place like Poland, where the radical liberalization under Tusk inflicted a tremendous amount of damage on the Polish society, contributed to its basically division between classes and regions. And now, if you don't have money anymore, you might want to use culture and values to keep something together that can no longer be kept together on the promise of economic convergence. Then you need value convergence. Now, value convergence is a complicated and risky strategy because one thing that is characteristic of the European political system inside the European Union is the capacity both of the center to try to intervene into the domestic politics of the periphery, but also the opportunity for the opposition in national politics to use its connections in Brussels to try to overcome the majority governments in their country, sort of with a reinforcement from Brussels, either by threatening not to pay subsidies, or by whatever political prestige. And there again, the case of Tusk is characteristic, who is now returning to Poland with all the support that he has collected during his time as president of the European Union, trying to bring his country online with the majority views of liberal democracy, where, as a sociologist, I'm concerned, or I wonder why people don't understand that a country that is deeply conservative in a Roman Catholic way, why such a country should be reoriented within a matter of a few years in the direction of secularized liberalism of Western Europe, where it has taken 100 or more years to establish itself. Yeah.
Now, again, going back to the notion of a liberal empire, of course, every empire is built around the dynamics between the center and periphery. You've mentioned culture as one of the ways of supporting the position of the center vis-a-vis the periphery. Now, another thing which has been discussed a lot, right, is the rule of law, the notion of the rule of law. This, again, is some sort of a recent development that we have seen, and it's been filling the pages of academic journals and newspapers and whatever. Now, the rule of law as a notion, right, imposes certain fixed limits on politics in ways that are unconditional, right? So it is a very powerful tool. Now, it's not just a legislative project, but it's also an ideological and socio-cultural project, right? So I'm just, the question is, what role does the rule of law play in your discourse of the liberal empire today?
I mean, the idea that law is guiding and containing the political will of a democracy is not a new idea, and it has a good deal of validity to it if it is inserted in a political community in a way that fits the politics, the class structure of this and the needs of this community. Otherwise, it is true. Otherwise, one has to emphasize that what is law and what is not law is a matter of interpretation. There is no. It is a very strange idea that you can take a legal prescription and then transplant it into some other country and then tell them you interpret what that law means. To take a very sort of obvious example, a man like Henry Kissinger, who under all ideas of international law is a war criminal. He is a war criminal, but no problem. And he's roaming around in the West, and he's getting doctoral degrees and all of this, and they are paying him for advising them on foreign policy. That's a very strange phenomenon, but apparently he fits into the rule of law in these countries. I would say, what the rule of law means is a matter for complex legal and political deliberations that have to take place inside a sovereign political community. To give you the following example, which comes very close to recent events in the European. In the European Union. This is the German Constitutional Court. Now, the German Constitutional Court reads the treaties of the European Union as saying that the competences of the European Union sort of are laid down in the treaty, and that it is only the treaty that is on the basis of which it has to be decided what the Union can do and what the nation states can do. Apparently, Brussels has a different idea about this, which is that it is the European Court that makes these decisions, and that national constitutions have to be second-ranked behind not even the Constitution of Europe, because Europe has no constitution, but what the European Court decides. Now, what is rule of law here? In fact, the European Commission, driven by basically green German deputies, is now taking Germany to the court, to the European Court, implying that the German government has the responsibility to tell the German Constitutional Court that they have to follow judgments made by the European Court. that is to resolve the conflict between the two in favor of the Luxembourg Court. Now, an executive telling its constitutional court what the law is, what the rule of law is something that is totally alien to the constitution of West Germany since 1949. Our lesson from the fascist period was that the constitutional court should not be told by the executive what the law is. Yeah. Interestingly, at the same time, the European Commission is trying to take Poland to the European Court for the Polish executive, trying to tell the Polish Constitutional Court what the rule of law is. Yeah. So the moment you get into the complications of this strange relationship between the European system and the national system and the various national systems between them, it's a very open question what the rule of law is and what is not. And my lesson from this is that this decision can only be made with due attention, both to what the treaties say and to the sovereignty of the states that are part of the European Union, who are sovereign states, in other words, that cannot take and should not take commands from other states.
Now, the rule of law is a term which is used quite extensively in our debates about the populist projects that are emerging, particularly from the Central and Eastern European countries. But before we go to a Central European context, what about the term populism? Because in your work, you have shown that this term is often used to label any tendency or any organization which rejects the responsible politics of neoliberalism, right? So as we all know, it's a powerful terminology that has the tendency to naturalizes the status quo. All opposition is kind of backed into this one form, which is called populism, and we do not need to talk about the content and the specific demands, right? So if we look beyond this outright prescriptions of the theories of Western democracy, should we not rather read this in the context of how these populist movements are actually able to kind of draw upon the political imagination of the respective nation states and their cultures? Isn't it something about what the voters imagined about the potentialities of political action, and how this for many surprising development shows the limits of the European project?
Yeah, and see, I would put it like this: the neoliberal project was one that insisted on there being no alternative to the internationalization and the international liberalization of national economies as the only way of running a modern society after the end of communism and after 1990 and in the period of globalization, what Danny Roderick calls hyper-globalization. Yeah. Now, if you tell grown-up people that there is no alternative, then they begin to rebel because they are used to making responsible decisions over between alternatives. The claim that there is no such alternative is very easily understood to be an attempt to impose a dictatorship of technocratic politics on the real politics of a society. Yeah? So to me, even if I hear there is no alternative, then someone presents a theory in a seminar and says there's no alternative, I get angry because I think that ends critical or creative thinking. Now, what is even worse is the following: if you have theories of democracy must be put in the context of the historical place to which they are to apply. It is a big mistake to think that slave owner societies like Athens or Virginia could, and the reflections of their elites on democracy, on discourse, that this could teach us a lot in a political context, which is one of capitalism and class. If those that do the work are not allowed to participate in democratic discourse as they were in the English colonies in the United States, then you can invent all sorts of things. The moment that the lower classes have citizenship, the game of democracy sort of changes from a discourse over values to a discourse on a just distribution of the fruits of the production process in a society. In other words, then you have to put democracy in the context of capitalism. Now, in that context, you see that it is in conflict with the basic logic of capitalism. And you can put it roughly like this. In a democracy, everybody has one vote. In a capitalist economy, every dollar has one vote. Yeah. And the capitalist economy, by definition, is an engine of growing inequality among its participants. Why? Because the surplus value of a society that has to be produced and produced and produced because society has to grow, accumulates in the hands of 5%, 4%, 3% of the population, but not of the rest. Yeah. So then the question that you have to ask about democracy is, to what extent does the democratic constitution in a capitalist society allow the lower classes to impose on the political economy an egalitarian correction? Yes, namely interventions into the distribution of the common product to the advantage of those that would lose in the market. Yeah. Now, if this is the way it is, then I would put it probably like this and say that the democratic debates, the political debates, cannot nearly be elevated, as elevated and academic as they might be if the lower classes have no voice. You hear plebeian language. Yeah? People see the modern democracy. There's one principle, that the life experience of every single member of the society is worth exactly as much as the life experience of every other. My life experience and yours is exactly the same as that of Bill Gates. Yes? When it comes to democracy, we have to say exactly as much as he. At least this is the idea. Yeah, and then if it becomes let's say very conflictual in this respect, then there is a temptation on the part of existing elites to say that this rude and aggressive rhetoric on the sides of those that feel to be losers cannot really be admitted to the democratic discourse. This is when populism becomes a fighting concept. Yeah, and let me say one more observation. I spoke about economic redistribution, but it is equally important to take into account that in a process of rapid modernization, there will be people in a society who feel left behind on cultural grounds, who feel that there is establishing itself a dominant culture that does not respect them, that considers them sort of fallen out of time. And this kind of contempt is as divisive in a society as the economic problem. And in Europe, I think now we have shaping up on the horizon a situation in which there's not only economic disparity, but also less respect for some members of the political community than for others. And I think this is incendiary. This is extremely, extremely dangerous because people who feel that they are not respected enough can invent all sorts of things. One last point on this: I think that in traditional or in the more post-war democratic systems, there were center-right parties who integrated people like this by by making sure that they could still feel respected groups, like conservative Catholics. And so they could sort of slowly come along with the development of the society. I see this integrative capacity waning in our societies, and I'm very concerned about this.
And in this picture that you have painted, and going back to the center-periphery divide and the liberal empire, what does it tell us about the current East-West tension within the European project and the populist movement in the Eastern and Central European countries?
Yeah, I think I touched on this. If it continues that the center of the European Union, especially the Commission and the Court, are trying to dictate to peripheral countries a particular mainstream culture that is, as I said, still relatively new even in Western Europe, as a condition for economic redistribution. In other words, for creating the conditions of economic convergence, then that union is going to disintegrate. Now, even more, political systems have complex layers, and one of the layers of this liberal empire is also a geostrategic thing. It is the idea that on behalf of the West, whoever that is after Biden and Afghanistan, it is the job of the European Union to keep the Balkans and Poland, the Czech Republic, sort of in line with the West in a confrontation with Russia, which is sort of smoldering on the sidelines and wondering why the Americans, who have promised them in 1990 not to move NATO troops to the Russian border, why they now do this. Yeah, and the geostrategic aspect is extremely important. I think our American friends do not care so much about LGBTQ or whatever. They care about the Poles being willing to accommodate American troops on their soil. Yeah, for that reason, the European Union sort of has to pull them into the West, and one thing is money, and the other is sort of cultural means. So I think the politics of Europe may be seen as cultural politics, as economic politics, but also as military strategy. Sometimes they are in harmony with each other. Sometimes sort of the culturalists can be, let's say, overzealous elements, like in Brussels, they want to kick Poland out of the European Union, which they apparently seems to be the case. And then I think the American ambassador will come. And he will say, folks, don't overdo it. Yeah, we need Poland because Poland, remember, borders at Russia. And also at Ukraine, and so we cannot push Poland outside. So the one last remark on this, I think that the Poles should really realize that this sort of surplus zealousness in Brussels has no support from the more geostrategically oriented elements in the West. I would say, including Germany, which I think cannot accept a situation where Poland, like Britain, would secede from the European Union.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all the questions that I had for you today. It's been great and enormous pleasure to be able to interview you for the Reopen project. So, Professor Streeck, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you very much.